Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and happy first night of Hanukkah.
Yes, welcome everyone, and a happy holidays to one and all. It is the first night of Hanukkah and exactly 1 week until Christmas, which means holidays are in full swing. Normally, we'd be resting up and preparing for the long, arduous drive that we have to make every year for Christmas to see our families. But we decided to do something special this year, a little holiday gift for y'all. So as a lot of you know, we've been well behind in a bunch of our shows and stuff, and big reason of course is because we had to move and it took a lot longer than we thought it would. We had a lot of real world issues going on at the same time that really prevented us from settling in and just getting comfortable and getting back on a regular schedule. So because of that, a lot of the shows we did either ended up getting delayed or they weren't done at all. In the case of the shows that weren't done at all, we admit there were some that we really wish we had gotten to and some that we were on the fence about, but we figured we'd check them out first before actually reviewing them. In terms of those shows, we're actually going to bring a couple of them to you today. This is the first part of a 3-part review, which we are calling
Catching Up with the Mouse.
Of course, I don't want this to be one video per show. Some of them I don't think warrant enough content to devote an entire video to, so we're gonna get 4 of those shows out of the way in part 1. And these shows are the following. We have Werewolf by Night, Zootopia Plus, Tales of the Jedi, and Hamster Gretal. We'll go over them in basically length order, since I know some of them only have 1 episode, some of them have up to about 10 or 13, so figure start with the shorter stuff first and work our way up. Before we start though, I do want to note that both of us are coming off of a cold, so if we cough throughout the review, apologies. Like, we're doing our best to get over it, but you know how it is. Coughs always linger no matter how hard you try to get rid of them and how much cough syrup you guzzle.
Mine's been going on since Thanksgiving.
So with that being said, let's start with the first item on the list, Werewolf by Night. So Werewolf by Night was actually Marvel's first Halloween special ever. And it was interesting because they were actually trying to do it as a straight up old school like sort of horror film, but with a bit of a comedic twist to it. I admit I never read any of the Werewolf comics, so I had no context for what was going on. But from what I've seen of this, I don't think it's that hard to understand or follow. And given its length, I say it was about the appropriate amount in order to constitute being a Halloween special. What do you think?
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, it's nice that Marvel is reminding people they didn't just have, not even just Marvel, I'm talking about like comics in general, that there are more than just superhero comics out there. There are horror comics. Obviously, there are also like romance and all sorts of other genre of comics out there. But again, like I said, it's nice that we get a focus on the non-superhero, that we get to pay homage to the horror comics. And not only that, pay homage to like the older black and white movies. Given that whole 20s, 30s, 40s feel, golden age of movies, cinema, your Frankenstein, your Dracula, your werewolf movie, Mummy. It's nice to get that.
Yeah, from what I heard, they definitely were trying to stay true to that sort of time period, by virtue of the fact that they actually use practical effects in this. Granted, there probably were points of CGI, but for the most part, all the costumes you see are actually like practical costumes. I think, was it Gael Garcia said that it took him about 4 hours to get into the werewolf costume, which, Jesus, but I imagine after a while I get used to it. I thought that was cool. I thought that the fact that they used like an actual like sort of puppet thing for what they call a man thing or whatever, you know, as his effect. Like, he had some CGI, but for the most part, like, he was, I think, an actual puppet with a guy operating him. I also heard a big part of the reason why it was in black and white, aside from, you know, paying homage, was to keep it from being TV or something like that, because obviously it's a werewolf film. There's going to be a lot of blood and gore and stuff like that, and Marvel can only get away with so much, so the black and white kind of helped to disguise the blood in that respect. With that being said, I thought the acting was really good in this. It was interesting choices they chose. Like, I didn't recognize everyone at first. I later looked them up and I saw that I did recognize a few. Like, for instance, Gael Garcia, he actually was in Coco. He voiced Hector. So So I recognize him. Then we had Laura Donnelly as Elsa Bloodstone. She was an Outlander. She was Jamie's sister. It was nice to see that they had actors that I knew were actually really good actors in this. And apologies if I glanced down, so we had to watch a bunch of these in a row, so I can't remember all the names offhand, so I might have to reference. Apologies. But yeah, for the short time we see them, they actually managed to form like a good companionship, which is odd because you have Elsa, who descends from monster hunters, and granted she does defect from them because she doesn't agree with the fighting methods, but the mentality is there, yet she ends up by the end of this basically joining forces with a werewolf to take down her own clan and fellow hunters, which you can respect her for. And you see that the werewolf, Jack Russell, actually puts himself in peril to save Man-Thing, or Ted as he's known. Have you met Ted? I have a feeling they call him Ted because even, the people at Marvel are like, yeah, Man-Thing's a stupid name. And it's like, what constitutes calling him Man-Thing? He doesn't even look like a man. I think he looked more like a tree or something.
It also kind of humanizes him, too.
Yeah, that too, because you actually feel bad for him, and you actually want to see Jack rescue him, because the big reason this whole thing's happening is because Elsa's father, Ulysses Bloodstone, had passed away.
He gets, all these hunters together to basically participate in a to-the-death hunt of the Bloodstone,
which they embedded in Ted. And the thing with the Bloodstone is what makes it so important to monster hunters is that A, it can zap a monster of its power, or B, it can trigger it into revealing itself if it's in disguise. So naturally this is an important thing everything wants, and while Elsa normally would have inherited it because she defected, she wasn't considered eligible, but she shows up anyway because she considers it her birthright. Of course her stepmom doesn't agree and is a huge bitch about it, but she's there, she may as well go for it like everyone else, and hey, if she dies during the process, what does her stepmom care?
Speaking of her stepmom and her father,
oh
god, that is a very uncomfortable situation.
Yeah, so toward the beginning when we find out, the whole reason for these hunters visiting and stuff, and we find out about the will and her father's last testament and everything, the way that it's presented is the stepmom has his dead corpse basically pop out of a coffin and talk through this recording that he left, telling everyone what exactly he wished for. I'm like, was that necessary?
Not to mention the stepmom is just gone. Enamored with his dead corpse the whole time. It's
it's funny because we just did a review with Zen of Jim Carrey's A Christmas Carol, and there was that part when Jacob Marley shows up and his jaw just detaches, but he's holding it up by a napkin, and he's moving it like a puppet, forcing himself to talk. That kind of what reminded me of it a bit, and I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you people? I guess they were trying to go for a bit of a lighthearted comedic thing, since this is a sort of scary monster thing, but I'm like, was that really freaking necessary? Just read his will or play the audio he left behind. Why did he have to have the whole comedic skeleton thing? I know he said that was his wish, but I'm like, dude, you are a deranged fuck.
He is eccentric. Or was eccentric.
That being said, I don't remember too much about the other hunters, if being honest. Even when I was looking them up, I barely remember them. I think they each had a specialized weapon that they use, but mostly they're just there as part of the body kill count.
I do remember there was that one Scottish guy who was friendly with the main guy.
Oh, Jack.
With Jack. Once they get into the competition, it's that's just gone. That's kind of a mark of how well the character is. It's 1 minute you're all friendly and everything, but then you have to put all that aside because you're in a fight to the death.
Frankly, it baffles me how they can't tell that he's a werewolf. Because these are supposed to be elite monster hunters, and even the Bloodstones, they all descend from a long line of monster hunters. You think they would have something in place to sort of signify if a werewolf is near, or at least put stuff to deter them from their mansion. The fact that he's able to just waltz in and out, and the fact that they couldn't tell until he touched the Bloodstone was kind of baffling in a way. And I don't know if because he took the measurements to protect himself, but they never really show it. I don't know, that always just felt kind of weird to me. Because it's how can you know this person for years, supposedly fight monsters alongside him, and not know the whole time he's a werewolf? Like, I know werewolfism is easier to hide than vampirism, but still, there are signs. That being said, when he does transform, I did think it was legit terrifying, and mostly because they didn't really show it. It was more like in shadow, and all you see is just Elsa's terrified face as he's transforming, and you just hear his blood-curdling scream as he's forcibly changed. I actually thought that was a really good way to do that. Because, like, on the one hand, they could have done it the old school way by doing, like, you know, the short cuts showing him gradually transform, or just the way they would do it in, like, American Werewolf in Paris or whatever, and make it really grotesque. But I think the way they did it here was pretty good. Bottom line, I'm just glad when he finally slaughters them all.
Yeah.
And some of them were pretty cool, too. Like, I like when, like, the stepmom is about to kill him, and then Ted comes out of nowhere and just fucking incinerates her right there, along with her husband's corpse. That was just great. Although it was kind of weird at the end when it suddenly turned to color.
I know. It's like they did a whole Wizard of Oz sort of
They didn't play the song
They
over
even
the
play
rainbow.
on Somewhere Over the Rainbow. I'm like, why?
I guess it was to signify that the danger was over, or that, you know, all the evilness that drained color out of the world was gone. I don't know.
It was a weird choice.
Yeah, and then you just see those two just like, you just see Ted and Jack meet up and they're like, well, what do we do now? I'm like, good question. So yeah, to my knowledge, I don't believe that they're bringing these characters back or doing anything significant with them, which is a shame because I did hear that they are part of this one group of like monster heroes, like that also includes Ghost Rider and I think Blade possibly. So if they wanted to, they could do other specials like that with those monsters and maybe set up something in that regard, but I think at the moment they just want to do a one-off Halloween special, which is perfectly fine. I think this was very suitable for it, and I thought it was a really good Halloween special.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it definitely opens the door for them to do anything else like that if they want to, and I think it was very well received by everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've hardly heard anyone say a bad thing about it. Like, maybe it was a little too short or something like that, but I don't know. For what it was, I thought it was pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So now the next up on our list, we have Zootopia Plus. So Zootopia Plus is basically what Lion King 1.5 was to the Lion King movies. These are basically a bunch of in-betweens short stuff featuring like the side characters that kind of do, kind of don't tie into the main plot. It's just kind of there for fun. It's supposed to like explore more of the Zootopia world because I do believe they are coming out with a sequel for sure, and I guess this is supposed to tide us over the meantime, which is all well and good. And I mean, technically speaking, even if they wanted to make a TV series of this, I think they have a lot to work with given the uniqueness of the world. Because I mean, how often do you see an anthropomorphic world where you literally have like 7 different terrains all within driving distance of each other? I think that's pretty cool. But for this, we have 6 episodes to get through. From what I heard, they was initially pitched as 2, they extended it to 6. In fact, they wanted to do 10, but sadly, because of the pandemic and other factors, it got cut down to what we have now. I'd say it's about half and half as to whether or not they're good. What do you think?
I agree. It's kind of distracting that they have all of these shorts basically take place within some part of the time frame of the movie. I kind of wish it was outside of the movie's timeline, like more sequel-ish. You have more to play around with, or you know, they could even have like prequel stuff because they did technically. One of the stories is the rat godfather talking about how he moved to Zootopia and how he befriended people and grew his family, grew his company. It's kind of interesting that you get, you know, something like that talking about establishing, about giving us a background of Zootopia itself.
Yeah, I agree. For the most part, about 5 out of 6 of the episodes feature, again, characters we're already introduced to, and they kind of go through like little mini arcs, or at least we see them in intense situations where they kind of learn a lesson by the end. And I can appreciate that because, you know, it's hard to flesh out every character in the span of a movie, especially when they're not the focus. So I appreciate the attempt in what they tried to do. I wouldn't say that all of them were fully successful though. So, starting with the first one, it starts when Judy leaves for Zootopia and her parents are seeing her off. Of course, they're obviously very overprotective. They really don't want her going, but they know it's her dream to be a policeman, so they do let her go reluctantly. Unfortunately, this ends up turning into a Looney Tunes cartoon because one of her baby sisters decides to follow her onto the train. And so the entire episode is the parents just following them in their truck, trying to get to the baby before she, kills herself. Because she's basically on like a bullet train here, and so much shit can happen, as we've seen in the Bullet Train movie. I mean, it was cool in the sense we got to see them drive through the different terrains, sort of like what we saw in the opening of Judy coming to Zootopia, where they go through the desert, through the tundra, through the jungle and stuff. But for the most part, it was kind of underwhelming. Because, honestly, her parents aren't really that interesting, nor do they have interesting reactions or whatever. They're kind of just taking this whole thing with a grain of salt, and yeah, they were worried about their kid, but, they managed to ultimately get her in the end, only to lose her again and go back the way they came.
Oh, that was frustrating. It's kind of like this baby's day out sort of deal.
Yeah.
It's like the parents basically somehow managed to keep up with the train in their, tiny car, even though they go through the woods and things that should have immediately cut this trip short, and somehow they managed to make it all the way to the station without being noticed.
Yeah, I don't care if they're rabbits and they're all about speed. There's no way a rickety-ass pickup truck is gonna catch up to a bullet train, no matter what they do, especially in the different terrains and stuff they had to drive through. But like I said, it was cute, I guess, just to see the shenanigans. I didn't really care about it too much. It's like nothing of consequence changes or is lost or anything like that. So, whatever. It's
mainly played for, comedic, but also that danger. What's gonna happen? Are they gonna make it?
The next one, I think, had a little bit more substance. This focuses on Fru-Fru, the daughter of Mr. Big, the one that Judy saves from being crushed by the giant donut. They kind of do a Real Housewives parody and stuff, which makes sense given that, she's basically the daughter of a Don, so she would be rich and, have that kind of lifestyle. And the whole thing kind of follows her and her friends, after she gets engaged and she's trying to figure out who her maid of honor is, only for her cousin Tru-Tru to show up, who's basically a clone of her. And of course, Tru-Tru pisses her off to no end and kind of goes bridezilla for her, trying to control her wedding and stuff, saying, oh, you promised when we were kids that you would make me your bridesmaid, da-da-da. And of course, she basically takes over the whole thing until Fru-Fru inevitably blows up at her. I thought this was going to be one of those annoying things where, making fun of, the Valley Housewives deal, because, dear God, I can't bring myself to watch those shows. They're just so annoying, and they're played up just for, the drama and everything.
I mean, that's all reality shows.
I know, but it's especially egregious with those shows. Although I did like the one friend, the mouse, who had, an anklet on because she just got out of prison. That was funny. The part, though, where it switches up and actually, gives you the feels is when, after Judy saves her, she kind of reflects on everything and is like, maybe I was too harsh on my cousin, throwing her out of the wedding and stuff. So when she talks to her and her cousin reveals, it's like, hey, you always told me what your dream wedding was and everything. I know you. I know exactly what you want. And sure enough, to prove her point, because in the episode, she's trying to find a wedding dress, but she unfortunately keeps finding these ugly, hideous dresses. Her cousin gives her a dress which belonged to her mother. You always wanted to have a simple wedding like your mother did, so that I wanted to make that happen for you. And it's like, oh my God, the feels.
I'm getting verklempt talking like this. I'll give you a topic.
It's like, no matter what, your family knows you better than you know yourself, which I guess is true in some realities.
Depends on your family.
Yeah. But I could see in her case that actually was the truth, and it was the right choice with making her cousin the bridesmaid. So it was a nice kind of lesson for Fru to learn. I mean, I always thought she was a nice person anyway. I mean, she's the reason why Judy and Nick didn't get killed by her father and why they got as far as they did in their investigation. So, props to her for that. And then the third one is about the Duke of Weaseltown. Wesselton! No, it's actually Weaseltown. This is after Duke gets arrested by Judy after he tries to hightail it after trying to sell her some bootleg Disney movies. It still is always my favorite part in Zootopia. Of course, he doesn't give a crap. He's been in and out of prison so many times, but in this instance, he actually feels the after effects of what he's done because there was video shown of Judy capturing him with a giant donut and turning him into the police captured in said giant donut. This ends up making him the laughingstock of Zootopia. naturally, you know, he takes that moment to reflect and be like, what am I doing with my life? You know, I've been on this crime spree for so long. I really should, you know, reinvent myself. And he kind of breaks into this spontaneous musical number about all the stuff he could have done with his life, or stuff he can do with his life, or the repercussions of choices from changing his life. And it's like this whole big, like, Broadway style thing. I don't know. I didn't really care for it. Like, I thought it was cute enough, but it wasn't like anything spectacular. The part, though, that stands out the most in this episode, though, is that by the end of his musical number, he decides at the very least he really should change his ways for the better. And so he sees that this elderly goat had dropped his wallet. So he, instead of doing his natural instinct by taking the wallet and leave, he gets the wallet and goes to return it to the goat. Unfortunately, the goat was standing in the middle of the street, and he gets hit by a truck. And I'm like, did we just go in this direction? Did I just watch a goat die? But no, he's fine, he's fine. It just so happens a bank truck hit him, and a bunch of bags full of gold just fall out the back. So naturally, what does the weasel do? Oh, take the money and run. Basically, no lesson was learned.
We thank you for watching No Moral Theater.
Some things never change. Yeah, that was pretty much the episode in a nutshell. It's like, thief gets humiliated, thief rethinks his life, thief goes back to his old ways. Okay, cool. We'll probably see him doing the same exact shit in, like, the next Zootopia movie, if I had to guess. The next segment, in my opinion, is easily the best one. It's where we learn the backstory of Mr. Big, aka the rodent godfather, and how he came to be what he is. It basically is a story of, he was an immigrant that came over from the old country with his grandmother. They were struggling to set up in a city that really wasn't catered to animals their size. Literally, there was like no place for rodents to live. You see them living in shoeboxes, you see them living in like traffic lights, and basically wherever they can just manage to fit without being squished. And you see what a hard life it is, because like he tries to sell his grandmother's baked goods, but because he's so small, he keeps getting almost stepped on by everyone. But thankfully, through his tenacity and his good nature, he's able to make friends with polar bears, and they're able to help actually make his deliveries easier. So gradually, his grandmother and him start saving up enough money. They start incorporating more animals to helping them and stuff, and they start to try to give back to the community to make it easier for smaller mammals to live. Unfortunately, there's a big mafia already in place who are trying to kick out a lot of the smaller animals, because you know how it is, the bigger you are, the more you're going to shove around the smaller animals. And finally, it all comes to a head where he actually stands up to the big mafia don, and he actually manages to take him down, thanks not in part just to his bravery, but to the community that built around him. So because of that, he becomes very well respected. They manage to gather their resources. They make it easier for immigrants to come over, and eventually they end up building that whole town, Rodentia, strictly for smaller animals so they can live safely and in peace. So the whole thing of that was him talking about the importance of community, that it's important to make friends, to be kind to people, and to, you know, work together so you can make everything around you a better place to live. And like, this is all part of a speech he was giving at his daughter's wedding too. So I thought that was really nice, you know, him showing that as long as you have community, like, you'll never be alone.
But if the groom should mess with his daughter, he ain't gonna be so nice.
He'll be put on ice.
Yeah.
Oh, one part I forgot to add at the end of the Fru-Fru bit. At the end, at her wedding, when Fru-Fru ends up making up her bouquet, which is full of night howlers, and when she tosses the bouquet, they catch it and smell it, and that's when it causes them to go feral, and they just attack everyone. I thought that was funny too, and a nice foreshadowing to the twist.
But I thought that one was good. Like I said, that one actually did a nice bit of world building there. Something none of the other shorts really got into. This one is like the good reason for these shorts to exist.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because honestly, when I was watching Zootopia the first time and I'm looking at the different animals that inhabit it, I'm like, how are some of these animals able to live in this type of environment? It's like, I guess Zootopia is supposed to be like the epicenter of where all species from all different types of life can actually coexist together in harmony. But at the same time, it looks like it's built all for certain animals of size. It's like, how are the larger ones supposed to get around? How are the small ones supposed to get around? I assume by that point they had figured it out, or at least in part thanks to Mr. Big, they definitely at least were able to accommodate the smaller rodents a lot more. But yeah, I hope we get more like that, because I can really appreciate that, especially with the parallels to, you know, people who are immigrants, who descend from immigrants, who are trying to make a place for themselves in this new country, keeping a part of what they came from while also creating a legacy for their descendants. So I can always appreciate that. The next one, in my opinion, is arguably the worst out of them.
I agree.
Yeah, it was, what was his name? Harryhauser? He's like the fat cheetah policeman that works the precinct. So as we all know, he's a big Gazelle fan, and when he hears that she's actually looking for backup dancers, he wants to enroll. The only problem is they're accepting pairs to try out. And he doesn't really know anybody that is that big of a Gazelle fan until, obviously, he comes across...
the chief.
Yeah, the chief. Yeah, and as we all know, Chief Bogo also is a Gazelle fan. However, because Harryhausen doesn't want to make it seem like he's gathering police resources for no reason, he kind of like initiates a code red or something and says that, oh, we have to go undercover because something heinous might be going on, and the chief, for whatever reason, believes it. So he participates in this whole thing, thinking they're going undercover and stuff, until it gets too much and Harryhausen has to confess the truth, by which point, you know, the chief is visibly pissed and he leaves. Ultimately, he comes back, because it's that feel-good story where it's like, oh, Harryhausen's gonna realize his dream and he's gonna become a backup dancer and stuff, but guess what? It was all a dream. And I don't mean like, you know, oh, I wish for this someday. No, it was a literal dream. He dreamed this whole thing up. And this happens like shortly before Judy calls in the team, because I think at that point she had faced down the mayor, the sheep. So they were calling in for that, and that's when he sees the chief watching, you know, the Gazelle video. It was that point in the movie. Yeah, I thought this was easily the worst one, because it was like embarrassing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's no way the chief is this stupid. But granted, it was a dream, so you know it's not actually the chief believing this stuff. But even so, it was just kind of cringe.
On top of that, it's like, even if this wasn't a dream, it looked like this was happening on the clock. So it's like, how are you gonna take off work to do this?
I know, the fact that he lied to the chief, that he made this seem like an emergency, like you were using police resources for your own whims, and you're lying to your chief of police. If this were actually going on, he would have been fired. Yeah, if he would have gotten the backup position, that would have been all he would have had at that point, because he'd have no job. We said, thank God it was a dream.
Yep.
Apologies, it was Clawhauser. Sorry, Harryhauser was. I'm thinking of like the monster effect artist. Sorry, easy mistake. And then the final one is kind of different. In this one, we actually focus on a new character. She's a waitress named Sam. She is a good waitress, mind you. We see her working at the restaurant. She's able to attend to everyone appropriately, give them what they need and stuff. At this point, she's just trying to get all of her tables done with because she has tickets to go see Gazelle in concert. Unfortunately, about half an hour before she's supposed to clock out, that's when the sloths show up. Flash, flash, 100-yard dash. And we all know how fast sloths move. So naturally, she's trying to accommodate them best she can, trying to get their order in, but given that they talk a mile a minute, it's hard to both wait on them and wait at her own tables at the same time. I relate with this so damn much. I've been in the restaurant biz for like at least 10 years. I've worked at several different places. I've had customers like this. I know exactly what it's like when you are this close to clocking out for the day, only to have a customer show up last minute and just make you stay like another half hour and make you late for whatever the hell plans that you attempted to have.
Not even just that, but that also because of them, she's not able to help everybody else who's asking, or she has to really budget her time so much to help them as well as the other guests.
I've had that too. Like, you will always get guests that are way more demanding than they should be, who demand all of your attention. And trying to do that when you have multiple tables is really a hassle, because it's like the second you show up from behind the kitchen, they immediately want your attention. They have like a billion different complaints and stuff, and like you're trying to get everything done, but like these people just will not let up. It's like the biggest pain in the ass ever.
And on top of that, this is when Flash decides that he's going to propose.
That was honestly the saving grace of this whole thing, because everybody in the restaurant's all pissed off at Sam. They're ready to like murk her on sight at this point. And then Flash just slowly gets down on his knee and takes out his ring and is like, "Will you marry me?" And everyone's like, "Oh." And I just love her reaction. She's like, "No way." I'm like that was funny. You had to. But thankfully that whole thing like diffuses the situation, because she does say yes and everybody's happy and they're like, "You know what, we understand what you were trying to do. Like, no hard feelings, whatever." That still took up a lot of time. She's worried that she's gonna miss the concert. Luckily, it turns out that Dash and his fiance are going to the same concert. So they even offered to give her a ride, which is cool. The problem is she doesn't know how fast Flash drives. And that's what leads toward the end of the film when Judy and Nick pull them over for speeding. And at that point she's like, "Can I just get out and walk?" I admit, like, that one did frustrate me a lot just because I've been through that personally, and I was like, I felt really bad for Sam, but by the end of it, I'm like, no, this was actually sweet, and it was funny too, so I count it among the good ones. So yeah, out of these 6, like I said, half of them I thought were good, half of them I thought were eh. I'm sure they could have done better if they weren't working within the restraints that they did, and I'm sure they would have had more stories to tell if given the time and resources. But I think for what we have for now, it's pretty good.
It does what it needs to do. Like I said, if it was just Mr. Big's story and the restaurant, I think those two justified making this the short. Everything else was kind of eh.
I wouldn't mind the Fru-Fru story too. I mean, it kind of ties into Mr. Big's story as well when you think about it. Or at least it could have been like a part 1 and then his could have been a part 2.
Like I said, though, it felt very restrained by having to take place within the time frame of the movie instead of outside of it.
Like I said, I'm sure we'll get other shorts, like once Zootopia 2 comes out, whenever that comes out. I mean, I really hope it does, because I love Zootopia, and I really look forward to how they continue it, because with the world they set up, there's so many possibilities. They can even introduce in new animal species, new environments and lands, and we can see new crime shenanigans and stuff. So I really look forward to it. Now on to our next review that sadly isn't as cheerful, Tales of the Jedi. So Tales of the Jedi is very similar to what Zootopia Plus was. Again, this is all stuff that takes place in between the main canon shows. It starts as early as before Phantom Menace and about as recent as I'd say before Star Wars Rebels. There's a lot of moments in between, but the two main focuses on this series is Count Dooku and Ahsoka. Two very different characters. Like, I'd even call them polar opposites in terms of like characterization, like in every single aspect. In terms of Ahsoka, the first episode we see is when she was born, and when she's a year old, she goes on a hunt with her mother, and that's when we discover her Jedi powers, or at least that's the first instance where they're brought to light. The second episode we see her in is when she's being trained by Anakin, and, you know, she goes through her trials and seems to do well, but he's not satisfied, so he tries to train her in a sort of real-world scenario by having the clones basically ambush her and stun her constantly, which, you know, inevitably prepares her for Order 66. And then the last one we see after she's been to Padme's funeral and then flees to go into hiding and then becomes a farmer. We see the events that inevitably lead to her going into Rebels. On the opposite side, we have Count Dooku. We actually see his past for once. We see Dooku, who started off as Qui-Gon's master, We see all the events that inevitably trigger him into going toward the dark side.
Him inevitably giving in to the dark side.
Yeah, these were like, it was a bit uneven in my opinion, because like we start off with Ahsoka, but then immediately go to Dooku, and then we focus on him for a while, and then go back to Ahsoka. So it was a bit uneven in that regard. I can sort of see what the parallels were supposed to be in terms of like how they each handled their difficulties and rejections and issues with the Jedi. But for the most part, like a lot of the stuff is kind of inconsequential. Like it might fill in a plot hole or two in terms of like the Clone Wars, but I don't know, for the most part I think they're just like simple side stories that at the very most at least give a little bit more characterization and understanding to why these characters are the way they are.
A little bit. I will say, the fact that they're calling it Tales of the Jedi, I wish it had focused on more than just Ahsoka and Count Dooku. I know they have other Jedi show up in the series, but it just feels like it's very restrictive. We're just focusing on these two characters ultimately. And then there's the whole thing, I feel like Clone Wars, the series basically instilled in that the Jedi are bad. There's really not a lot of gray there. They're just basically showing the Jedi are fucking corrupt.
That pretty much is the message in a nutshell, if we're being honest here. I mean, we already had hints to it throughout the movies, and Clone Wars kind of made it even more apparent. But Tales of the Jedi really hammer home just, you know, how utterly fucking useless the Jedi are when it comes to, like, preserving the whole moral ground and everything, because as Dooku constantly puts it, you know, they're basically slaves to the Republic. Whatever the Senate says, they do, and it doesn't matter if it's, you know, an unjust situation or not. And then there are Jedi that are just so, like, set in their ways that they cannot deviate from, like, the rules, that even when they do see these atrocities happening, they won't do anything about it because that's not the Jedi way. And they keep trying to claim we're a neutral party that just are supposed to, you know, restore order, but they're doing it at the cost of, like, lives and stuff. These entire planets are suffering and they're doing nothing about it. Like, honestly, when you see the Count Dooku stuff, it's very easy to understand why he turned to the dark side. I won't lie, I never read any of the books or any of the past stuff that deals with Dooku's past, so I had, like, no clue going in as to his whole history and stuff. Like, I didn't even know he was Qui-Gon's master, if I'm being quite honest.
I think it was implied to me. I think, like, they make a mention of it in, Attack of the Clones. It feels like he had that familiarity with Qui-Gon when he's talking to Obi-Wan. It's pretty heavily implied that Dooku was Qui-Gon's master. You see how he works with Qui-Gon somewhat when they go to that planet where the senator's son is being held captive. And then there's just really not much with, him learning. It's almost as bad as Phantom Menace and how they treated Obi-Wan as a Padawan. It's like, there's not really much there, but they show justification for his line of, I could use Qui-Gon's wisdom here, showing that he's the one that when Dooku is tempted into the dark side and starts using, like, the Force choke, is like Qui-Gon's the one that talks him down and is actually level-headed about the whole thing.
Well, one thing they kind of made clear based on the appearances we see him in the episodes is that Qui-Gon is probably, like, the last thing tethering him to the good side, because you know that he would have choked the hell out of that guy, consequences be damned. But for the sake of his Padawan, for the sake of keeping up what he taught him, he restrained himself. And I believe he'd been doing that up until Qui-Gon finally died. Because you can tell that once Qui-Gon had died, being killed by Darth Maul, that was kind of it for him. He was so distraught he couldn't even attend the funeral. And honestly, I don't blame him, because a lot of those people are the reason why Qui-Gon died. Because if the Council had just listened to him about the Sith and actually sent multiple Jedi to help them deal with this, he probably wouldn't have died. So I totally understand that. And it's not just that, but at this point we know that he's been in cahoots with Sidious, who is also responsible for Qui-Gon dying, because Maul was his apprentice. He knew about Maul. He knew that Sidious had him under his wing. And, like, he even blames him at one point when he confronts him.
I lost my apprentice and you lost yours.
Yeah. Because, like, he tries to justify it by saying, oh, equivalent exchange. Like, look at it this way. I can now focus all my attention on you. Because, you know, the Sidious way, where he tries to make his atrocities sound less bad than they actually are.
There is a moment in that short where it's very brief, but it's something that you would see in a movie with, you know, the symbolism. When Yaddle is talking with him, and it's very clear he's ready to move on to the dark side. And after they talk, the two of them split, and you see Yaddle go off into the light, and Dooku go off into the shadow.
Symbolism!
Yeah.
It kind of happens, too, during their battle, because Yaddle ends up following Dooku when he meets up with Sidious, and she overhears their whole insidious plot. So, of course, she wants to stop him. The problem is, she's by herself up against two Siths. There's no way she's coming out of this alive, especially by virtue of the continuity that we know. Of course, that's basically the last straw. That's the point where Dooku fully goes over the dark side. He has to fight Yaddle and kill her. And at one point, he almost does by slamming this giant-ass door down upon her and theoretically squishing her. Like, I thought that was pretty damn dark, but, you know, it was fitting. And at one point you see, like, there is a look of regret on his face, like, what did I do? You know, he had sort of like that Anakin moment when he, you know, basically killed Mace. Then she comes back from the dead for a brief moment, and, like, again, it's a whole symbolic thing where she's opening the door and letting the light in. You see Sidious, like, physically pulling away from the light, while Dooku for a moment looks like he's relieved that she's alive. But then she falls down, having used the last of her strength, and is now totally in darkness, and that's when he deals the final blow, sealing his turn to the dark side. Again, good symbolism there. Also, one thing I learned, Bryce Dallas Howard did the voice of Yaddle, which is interesting. You know, I mean, it fits, given her involvement with Star Wars. I just find it interesting that Yaddle actually speaks normal. Not like the way Yoda does. Like, I always wondered that.
It must just strictly be Yoda that speaks that way.
He's the one that has to be a weirdo. And actually, another, in terms of voice acting, because I know that they brought back basically the entire original cast, both from Clone Wars and Rebels and whatever. But I heard for Qui-Gon, yeah, they brought Liam Neeson back. But as a child, he's played by Michael Richardson, which is Liam Neeson's son. Which is all the appropriate.
Interesting. I don't think they could get certain people back. I think they just had them show up and not speak at all, if that were the case.
Well, yeah, I know in the case of Yoda, they had him there, he didn't speak. Yeah, because he had had a stroke by this point, so there's no way he could have...
I mean, technically you could get Frank Oz to reprise him, but,
true.
You know, he might be busy.
Yeah. I mean, it's fine. I mean, we didn't really need Yoda. Yeah. Like, we know at this point he's still kind of like blind to what's actually going on here, so it makes sense he's not involved. But even so, it's like, on the one hand, I'm glad to see this backstory for Dooku, because again, it makes me understand him as a character a lot more, because I was always baffled just by how he was able to be seduced by Sidious in the first place. He's an older man. Like, he's been training as a Jedi for most of his entire life. It would have taken something really significant for him to turn, but from what we see, yeah, that constituted it. You know, he had been dealing with the Jedi bullshit for God knows how many years. His one friend got promoted ahead of him because they didn't approve of his tactics. And of course, you know, that means he was passed up for a promotion. So just like Anakin, that fueled his turn to the dark side. So I think the lesson we learned is always promote people, because otherwise they'll turn into mass murderers.
Well, I think also there was kind of that backhanded sort of thing. Were you doing this just so you could get the promotion?
And Mace is like, what? No, I don't know what you're talking about. I totally didn't snitch on you. Dude, Mace is such a bitch. It's like, dude, I know you're doing what you think is right and everything, but dear God, you're such an ass about it.
Again, Like I said, they've really gone that extra mile to really make you not like the Jedi. To really not make you like Mace.
So yeah, it's basically an unfortunate, like, tragic ending, because I mean, we all know how it ends ultimately. Like, we know it's inevitable. It's still sad to watch nonetheless. And then, of course, Ahsoka's story, like, again, it wasn't really that interesting because since we focused so much on her in Clone Wars, I didn't really think there was much else they could do with her. On the one hand, you see where she came from, which I can appreciate. You know, seeing the planet and the family that she was basically taken from. And we actually get a nice scene with her and her mother. Her mother's showing her how to hunt, showing her not to be afraid and to always look death in the eye because that was part of life.
You know, things you teach a 1-year-old.
Well, let's be realistic here. We know that the Jedi basically sees babies with Jedi powers as soon as they're born. There was, like, literally no time we could have had to show her bonding with her parents at all. Like, this is honestly the closest. And from what I read, that was, like, the whole reason they went in this direction, because they were going to show just, you know, one of the Jedis coming, seeking out Ahsoka, realizing she has Jedi powers, and saying, okay, we're going to take her to get trained, and there was going to be a whole tearful goodbye with her parents. They're like, no, let's not do that for once. Let's actually, like, show a parent-child relationship that is actually nice. Furthermore, let's show a good mother-daughter relationship that is nice. How rare is that in Star Wars these days? Most mothers you see in Star Wars are A, usually dead by this point, or B, have an incredibly strained relationship with their children. Like, think of Sabine and her mother. I can very rarely think of, like, any good relationships that you see actively on screen showing mothers be mothers and bonding with their kids. Because most of the time they die. So I can appreciate them actually going in this direction. I mean, it's still heartbreaking nonetheless, because you know this is the only time she's going to get with her parents before she's taken away forever to be part of this freaking cult and basically have her life ruined from then on out. But for what we had, it was nice.
I mean, it is kind of nice. You see her go through trying to exist outside of the Jedi, try to live a quiet life, away from, you know, seeing the Empire. But of course, you know, one day she has to save somebody and reveal her powers, and eventually somebody squeals and a Inquisitor comes to town to destroy everybody. Yeah. So she's like, I was out, but now I have to be back in. But I guess that's what ultimately leads her to become Fulcrum.
Yeah, that was another, like, thing I always wondered about, how exactly they got Ahsoka back into the fray, because we know that she had to hightail it after her fight with the clones, like her and Rex fighting their way out, and they were basically in survival mode at this point. And we don't see him again until Rebels, when it's revealed that she's been Fulcrum this whole time. But it's nice to see what led up to that point. We even see her at Padme's funeral, which was pretty heartbreaking. And we see that she actually does talk briefly with Bail Organa, who wants to help her, who even offers his home up to her for safety. Of course, she refuses because she knows that would just make him more of a target. He still gives her, you know, a communication device saying, like, look, if you ever get into trouble, call me, please. And despite her reservations, she still keeps it on hand all these years, and it comes into play when, despite the fact that this family almost sold her out down the river, she calls in his help to, like, save them and, you know, hide them away from the farm so no more Inquisitors come after them. Because unfortunately, once you've seen a Jedi, unless you were like some high-ranked individual or somebody of use, you're dead. And most of the people in the galaxy have no idea about that, which I'm glad they showed. You know, they showed like this guy being so staunchly pro-Empire and stuff, saying like, oh, I'll be rewarded if I tell him about the Jedi. And what does he do? He tells him about the Jedi, and his entire farm, most of the people he knows, all burned to ashes, and then he almost gets killed for his troubles. If that's not pink Empire, I don't know what is. I mean, granted, they're still not completely safe, because you know ultimately what happens to Alderaan in about, 5 years from that point? But point is, we see how Ahsoka realized that, yeah, I can't just hide away forever. I know there's still people fighting out there. If I'm gonna continue to fight, I should really help the people that need it most. A little plot hole they filled in there.
Although there is another potential plot hole you were kind of bringing up during the last Dooku sequence. As we were thinking, if this is taking place on the same day as Qui-Gon's funeral, then how is Sidious still on Coruscant?
Yeah, I was wondering that too, because like I said, most of the Dooku stuff takes place either before or during Phantom Menace. We even see that point where, he talks to Qui-Gon for the last time before he goes to Naboo and gets killed by Maul, and then we hear about his funeral going on. And, Yaddle ask him, like, why aren't you at the funeral? He's like, I wouldn't be good company. But then he leaves and goes straight to Sidious, and it's like, wait a minute, if this is during that point in Phantom Menace, we know that Palpatine is at the funeral. We know he's there seeing Qui-Gon's body burn away. How the fuck did he get from there back to Coruscant that quickly in a day? Like, I know they have spaceships, but you remember how long it took him to get from Naboo to Coruscant in the first place.
The most sense I could see is if you were using a hologram. They could have easily switched it to that, but
yeah,
no.
they should have, but
because honestly, there's no real reason for him to physically be there.
Yeah, but I also wonder, because I already know it's a huge stretch that he's able to do what he does on Coruscant in full presence of the Jedi and get away with it, but to do that on Naboo as well, where he arguably has less places to hide, I don't think that would have worked out as well. But that plot hole aside, I thought everything blended in rather seamlessly. This could easily be part of the regular continuity of Clone Wars. Again, I appreciate it for what it was trying to do. Like you said, they probably could have focused on other characters. Like, I'm sure there's other characters we've been wondering, what has happened to them since then? Where are they now? But for what we have, I think it's pretty good, decent.
Between the Jendi Clone Wars and the Dave Filoni Clone Wars and the prequels as a whole, you've introduced a whole mess of side Jedi characters that you could easily use this time to expand on. Instead, they've always been these underutilized characters that maybe get like an episode or two of character development, and then you just go back to forgetting they exist. I really wish they could have expanded on some of those. I'm at least glad that we got some time to, actually explore Yaddle.
Yeah, find out what happened to her ultimately. And we still got Bad Batch going on, so they very well may fill in even more plot holes left over from Clone Wars, so maybe we shouldn't complain as much since they probably are getting to that. Plus, Tales of the Jedi got a good reception, so they might be tempted to make even more in the future. It's the Star Wars universe. The possibilities and stories are endless. There's so much you can do. I don't think this is the only batch we're going to get, so it might live up to its title later on when we focus on other characters, assuming that's the direction they're going on with this. But yeah, now with Star Wars out of the way, at least that part of Star Wars, we go on to our fourth and final review, Hamster and Gretal.
Who's the improbable duo that you've heard about? Faster than a scooter, stronger than metal.
So yeah, Hamster and Gretel, I gotta say this is probably the only thing we've watched so far that I didn't really care for. So to be clear, we've only watched 10 of the 13 episodes that aired. We watched whatever was shown on Disney Plus, basically. But from what I've seen, I kind of already got the gist, and even though it's only been 10 episodes, I'm kind of already tired of the formula. So just to be clear, I've watched bits and pieces of Phineas and Ferb. I don't really care for it. I appreciate it for what it's done. I appreciate the jokes. I appreciate the character Doofenshmirtz and Perry and stuff. But it's not something I can watch in a row or binge or anything just because it's so formulaic and there are characters that honestly bug the crap out of me. In terms of Milo Murphy, I absolutely freaking love that show just because they go balls to the wall with just how wrong scenarios can go and just the amount of chaotic devastation that this one kid causes just by standing in a certain spot. And the way that they managed to actually add a serious storyline to it, actually build up to this big event, I thought was really cool. So I appreciate Milo Murphy in that regard. Hamster and Gretel feels like it's kind of getting back to formula status. The whole premise is basically an ongoing joke. What would happen if aliens bestowed powers upon these people, creatures, and things that didn't deserve it, and then didn't give it powers to the one person that did deserve it? That's kind of the whole thing that we've been watching for the last 10 episodes, which, keep in mind, are 15 minutes installments, so technically it's 20 episodes. So yeah, we basically follow Gretel and her pet hamster who get these amazing powers, become superheroes, and they're helped by her older brother Kevin, who, like I said, wasn't given powers for whatever reason, but because he's the older, more mature one that actually thinks ahead, he's the one that's planning a lot of the rescues and stuff, the way that they get out and stuff, whereas Gretel and Hamster are satisfied just to punch their way into scenarios. And it's basically a villain of the week type thing where they go up against all these random weird-ass bad guys with these weird names and shticks are just like kicking their butts because, you know, they decided to cause chaos for whatever weird personal reason they have. And that's basically the whole gist of the show. What did you think?
So yeah, I'm kind of with you on Phineas and Ferb. It's like, I'll tune in and watch every now and then. Like you said, I think Candace can get pretty irksome.
So annoying.
But yeah, it's like Doofenshmirtz and Perry the Platypus. You know, it's a cute show and it's harmless ultimately. And then Milo Murphy, I'm a big Weird Al fan, so that definitely was a huge point in watching it. I really enjoy the humor. I think they got good casting on the characters there. Like I said, the humor is really good. At first I was wondering, okay, how are they gonna do a whole series based on this one premise of this kid who basically can't go a minute without having some sort of chaotic crisis happen to him, and yet he's like completely optimistic about everything and loving every second of it almost. But then they throw in the storyline with the time travelers and everything. It's like, okay, that's interesting. But then the second season happens, and they expand the lore to make it so that Murphy's Law, or, you know, something like Murphy's Law, happens not just on Earth, but interplanetary. I'm like, okay, you have my attention. I want to see where this goes. And then they canceled it. Hamster and Gretel. Yeah, there is that whole formulaic thing to it that Phineas and Ferb does, which I don't mind, but it isn't very much helped by the fact that Gretel's voice actress is Dan Pavenmore or Jeff Marsh's daughter.
It's Melissa Pavenmore.
Pavenmore, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like she's kind of acting, but not in the way that I really hear a character of that age acting or sounding. It just sounds kind of stilted.
Yeah, I don't like to cry nepotism because I know that there are legit actors and actresses out there that are trying to make their own way in Hollywood without the help of their famous relatives or whatever, and some of them actually do a good job of their own merit. But in this case, it's clear why she got the role, because she is not a good voice actress. Like, she's supposed to voice, a 6-year-old girl, and she doesn't sound like a 6-year-old girl at all. And she has that same weird monotone voice, and it irks me so much. And I don't even really like the design of Gretel either. She has, like, that blank smile, like constantly. It's off-putting to me.
I do want to mention, though, the brilliant casting of Beck Bennett as Hamster. It's Launchpad if he's like smart Launchpad.
See, here's the thing. I like him and I don't like him in that role. I like it just because of how offsetting it is to have like a hamster who is so stoic looking, to have this deep manly voice and just speaks in random intervals, like he's almost like a Silent Bob thing where he only like speaks once like a movie just for comedic effect. But I also don't like it because I feel like they play him off as too much of a jerk, because every time he works with Kevin, he just like acts like such an asshole to him. And even when Kevin actively is trying to get along with him, he just brushes him off like he's nothing. And it's like, dude, you're a fucking hamster. You're gonna die in like 2 years. Like, why are you being such an ass? Not only that, but like we've heard Beckett's like comedic range, like especially as Launchpad. Like we've seen the great things he can do like as a character. With this, I feel like they're restraining him so much. And it's off-putting to me. Like, I feel like they could do so much more with Hamster, but no, he's just, a hamster with powers who has a deep, manly voice. That's it. And again, that's the whole problem with this show for me, is that everything is kind of like one running joke with one character. Gretel is like the 6-year-old girl who punches her way at stuff, and yeah, she learns lessons sometimes, but that doesn't really change anything by the next episode. And Hamster's like a stoic jerk who just, again, speaks maybe one line per episode. That doesn't change. And then Kevin gets perpetually shit on by everybody every episode. And again, while there are times where characters learn to appreciate him despite his lack of powers, it goes back to the same way the next episode. Like, that just annoys me. Like, I get it, that's how TV shows work. You would have something dramatic go on one episode, but by the end you're back to the status quo. But, like, I thought we were past that point. I've seen what Povenmire can do with his shows in terms of keeping continuity. Like, you can have the same running joke, but you can keep it going and then add stuff on top of that. Like, with Hamster and Gretel so far, it just feels like there's nothing.
I mean, there is definitely something. There's the aliens who are basically like orchestrating something. They give people or hamsters powers untold, and then they tell them, you know, go do good or go do bad.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like, Hamster and Gretel aren't the only ones that get powers. They actually go around giving them to random people. Bad people, mind you. For instance, these two fraternal twins. Like, they just got out of prison or something, and they're like, we're giving you the powers, now go do evil. And they're like, okay. And it's like, why? Why are you telling them to do this? And it's not just that. They're giving inanimate objects powers for no real reason. I see them give a fire hydrant powers. I see them give a bouncy house powers. Like, what the fuck is the purpose of all this?
I feel like it's ultimately going to be something out of the South Park episode Canceled.
They're trying to create like a TV show and manipulate the events around them, but then eventually everyone becomes self-aware of it.
That feels where it's leading to.
Honestly, that's the most logical thing, is because, again, ever since they got their powers, it becomes like a villain of the week type thing. We see some person come out of the woodwork that just has like a weird shtick going on, and they're like, oh, I became this way because of this, and now I'm gonna destroy all good. Then it's like, okay, we'll punch you into submission then. And I gotta read you off some of these villain names, because they are like freaking ridiculous. Granted, some of them are funny, but dear God, some of these. Like I said, we have the twins, who are the Destructress and Fist Puncher. Real original. We have Professor Exclamation, voiced by Phil Lamar. El Luchador. Rodney Thunderpants. That sounds like a stripper name. Van Dyke. I'm not gonna even touch that. Coach Haggerty. La Cibola. You know, the onion lady. Copycat and Nayslayer. Oh yeah, Dr. Eelgood, voiced by Keith Ferguson. Which it's like, you have the voice of Glomgold. Why don't you make him a cooler villain? What the fuck? They said they got some good voice actors in to voice these villains and stuff, but again, these are just villains of the week. They're like inconsequential in the grand scheme of things.
I do also want to bring up, because we kind of forgot about her, Fred.
Oh yeah, Fred. Like, she's easily the best character on the show. She's Kevin and Gretel's cousin, and she's a self-proclaimed sort of goth, like, loner type.
She's basically Daria.
She's basically Daria, and it's the same thing with Daria too, in that even though she's just a self-proclaimed loner who hates socializing, everybody loves her. And even when she pretends to be a cheerleader, she stays a cheerleader and everybody loves it. And they even proclaim her prom queen or whatever, to which she's like, nope, I resign my crown. But everyone just loves her so much and she hates it. I love that concept. Because most of the reason people become like that is because they feel like outsiders, because they get made fun of, they have low self-esteem, so they kind of embrace the whole goth loner type thing. In this case, she doesn't have that reason at all. She just naturally hates people and just hates that people love her so much.
I could get behind that. People suck.
Yeah. And I found out she's voiced by Joey King. And I know not a lot of people like Joey King, but I actually think she's a really good actress. Like, we saw her on Bullet Train, where she was the daughter.
Right.
Yeah, I thought she's a pretty good actress, and I couldn't even tell that was her at first in this. So, yeah, kudos to her for that. I think she does a really good job, and I said I would watch this only for Fred, if I'm being honest.
I feel like Kevin is Candace done better. He's in on thing, but he's not a narc.
Yeah.
You know, he's actively trying to help the situation.
He's honestly the only reason, like, Gretel and Hamster haven't died at this point. Because, again, You have a small child and a little creature who are just punching and destroying everything because that's how they think superheroing is done. And he's actually trying to teach them, no, you can't just destroy everything. You have to think logically. You have to find a way that doesn't involve people getting hurt. But every time he tries, like, he gets such shit for it. Like, they either don't listen to him or people disregard him and stuff. Eventually, people start associating him with Hamster and Gretel, and they just call him, like, what was it, Minivan Kid?
Yeah.
And that just becomes his name, and it's like, why would you do that? It's like, yeah, he drives a minivan, but he's the whole brains, like, he's the guy in the chair, basically. And he goes out of his way to try to save them sometimes, but he just gets no credit for it, and it's so frustrating. Like I said, that's part of the big reason why this show rubs me the wrong way. They just constantly shit on Kevin, and he doesn't deserve it. Like, yeah, there are times where he does get a bit of fame, and it goes to his head, but it's resolved rather quickly. He still has his, like, eye on the prize. He still gets serious when the time calls for it, but again, it's just that case of a real person that should be acknowledged just is constantly ragged on, and it sucks. So the finale that we saw, we think we're gonna get answers about the aliens and why they're doing this, but it turns out that the twin bad guys got a hold of their ship and is just going around for funsies, but it is implied that, yeah, there's something else going on, so I guess that's what's gonna happen for the remainder of the season. I don't know when the rest of the episodes are coming out. I mean, I'll watch just to find out inevitably where this is going. Like, I hope it kind of redeems itself by the end of the season, but otherwise, I'm not too inclined to continue following it at this point. It doesn't hold that much, like, draw for me. Like, honestly, a lot of time I end up, like, looking at my phone just because I'm seeing the episode and it just feels like a whole big in-joke that's going on that I'm not a part of, and it's like, yeah, I don't care enough to learn. But like I said, I'll at least watch the rest of it just to see where this goes ultimately. It's like, I'm too deep. I can't get out now.
I just hope ultimately, much like how Milo Murphy incorporated all of Phineas and Ferb into it, even having Doofenshmirtz become a regular character, I'm hoping they'll kind of incorporate Milo Murphy back in. And
that might be how they do it, if we're being honest, because last time we saw them, they were in space. So maybe that's their way of getting Milo back into the picture. Like, if that's the case, I'm all for it. Because if they were able to use Milo to get Phineas and Ferb back into the mix, then why not? They can do anything at this point, considering it all takes place in the same universe. I mean, granted, that means that this basically turns into what Boba Fett was for Mandalorian, but whatever, as long as they
I'd rather have Milo back, honestly. I'm sorry, Hamster and Gretel, but I want what I want.
Yeah.
So that's our 4-part review on things that we wanted to catch up on that we didn't really do a full-blown review of. Next time for part 2, we got Andor. The long-awaited series that we have been talking about since basically September. As of right now, we're about halfway through it, and we'll talk about why it's taken us so long to watch it.
Yeah, a lot of you already know our apprehension about watching this, and granted, we've been about halfway through and we're not suffering, but who knows by the end? I guess you'll have to wait next time and see. So until then, I'm Kat McBerry.
I'm Doug McBerry.
And see you all in part 2 of Catching Up with the Mouse.
Who's the improbable duo that you